For the first exercise of the 5th exercise session, you're asked to write a user program that uses system calls to read 2 numbers from the user's keyboard. Afterwards, we want to print the sum of these 2 numbers. So this is a relatively simple exercise. Let's first take a look at the system calls as defined for RARs. And so we will need to read an integer from the user input twice. That's system call number 5. How do we use it? We don't need to provide any input, and the output will be an A0, and that will have the integer that the user entered. And then we will have to print the sum, which is printing an integer. So we need to put the input in A0, and there is no output. So I'm going to already make a note about system calls. So we have we don't need to worry when calling a system call. In case of the RARs operating system, we don't need to worry about other registers than the ones that are specified in input and output. So all other user registers will remain untouched when we do a system call. This is something that depends on your operating system. You could be working on an operating system in which you do have to back up every single register. But in case of RARs, and so in case we would ask you to do a system call on the exam as well, you only have to worry about the registers that will actually be overwritten, that are specified in what you could call the ABI here of your operating system. So that's why when we go to take a look at this implementation, it's going to be very simple. First, we do the 5th system call, which is read an integer. So we load in A7 the value 5, and then we use the system call instruction, so ecall, environment call. This causes, as you know, if you've watched the presentation, this causes an exception. The exception will be handled in supervisor mode. Supervisor mode will see that the reason of the exception was an ecall. It will then check A7 to see what ecall needs to be performed. In this case, read an integer, so it will then ask the user in the console to provide an integer. That's what our OS will do for us. Once that's done, it will return the integer that was input into the register A0, which we promptly back up to the register T0, and then we load the value 5 in A7 again, which is in fact unnecessary. This line we could just remove. And we'll just work just as fine. We already had the value 5. So we will read another integer, and then the result integer A0 will be added up with our T0 integer. And notice we didn't back up T0 somewhere on the stack, for example. We didn't need to, because ecall won't override temporary registers. It will only override the registers specified here in the documentation, in the ABI. So this sums the 2 input integers together. And then lastly, we want to print the integer, the sum integer. So we stored that an A0. And why? Well, that's what print integer expects. So put in A0 the integer you want to print. So let us run this. And as you can see, nothing happens. First sight, that's because our console is waiting for a number from the user. So let's enter a number. And again, it's waiting for a second number. Let's enter a second number. And you see the sum is printed, 9. So that's a very, very simple way or demonstration of how you can use system calls in RARs. And so notice we didn't need to load 5 in this A7 register again, or we didn't need to back up T0, since we didn't need to actually back up any color safe registers. The only one that you need to back up are the ones specified in this list, in what you would consider the ABI of our operating system. But this is of course OS dependent. On some operating systems you might need to back up certain registers. Might be the same as the color save or callie save conventions, or it might not be. Typically it's not.